All right, everyone, let's get this started. So you guys ready to hear about the classes and combat of EverQuest Next? Well, good news is you're in the right place because I've been talking this panel up all day long, and trust me, you guys are not going to be disappointed. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Terry Michaels. I'm the senior producer of EverQuest Next and Landmark, and I'm going to be coordinating this and making sure these guys don't tell you too much, but give you enough information to just make you crazy. And so I'm going to introduce everybody here on the panel. So first off, we have Darren McPherson, who's the lead designer of EverQuest Next and Landmark.
Can I clap for myself?
Yeah, you clap for yourself.
We have Michael Mann, who's the lead systems designer for EverQuest Next and Landmark.
Woo, Michael Mann! He clapped for himself.
And then last but definitely not least is Jeff Butler, our creative director of both EverQuest Next and Landmark.
Go J-Bud!
All right, now I'm going to hand it off to these guys so they can tell you all the cool details, and we'll have Q&A at the end of this so we can see what you guys think about it. All right, Michael, get started.
All right, are we on?
Go for it, dude.
We're good? All right. This is good. So the first thing we wanted to do was review a little bit of what we talked about last year so we can catch you guys up to speed and so we can all be kind of on the same page. The first thing that we discussed last year is what makes a class iconic. Like, how do we get it to feel and look like what we want? And we went through a couple examples, and we talked about iconic characters and how a class should feel, right? So if you guys were able to check out the keynote stuff, you can see like the cleric has a certain feel. He has stances. He has armor and abilities and stuff like that that really make him feel iconic. The next thing we talked about was the process of fun. It was our development process, what we do, how we play test, how we basically how we develop a class. And the next thing we did was talk about the nuts and bolts, which basically is just how does the class function, right? And some of the important stuff that you guys will need to know was how you get your abilities. You get, when you pick a class or select a class to be kind of your main class for the time, you get a certain number of abilities that you'll always have as that class, right? So the cleric has some number of abilities that he can never multi-class out of, we'll say. And then he has some secondary abilities that he can swap between. And you'll see kind of why that's important here in a few minutes. And the last thing we talked about was multi-classing. Multi-classing is actually what we're going to be talking about mostly today. So, mostly? Mostly. Yes. Yeah. So this is just weird.
It's for aliens. Come on, it's for aliens.
No, I don't know. I don't know what we're talking about. We basically, at the end of the panel last year, we talked about how we're just barely scratching the surface of the class system. And this year, we're going to show you kind of the monsters beneath, right? We're going to show you the craziness that makes everything tick. And so we'll get right into it. Did you guys were you able to get a load of the Tempest? That was pretty cool. So we're going to be using the Tempest as our example throughout this panel. So I hope you guys saw it. But the Tempest basically starts out with two low-level abilities, and forgive our icons. We handmade them with no artists involved. So Rosie, we're sorry. But your first ability when you're the Tempest is Lightning Strike. And Lightning Strike is just a basic attack. You swing in front of you with your sword and you deal lightning damage to the people in front of you. And the other ability, Dave swore I was going to say this wrong, but it's called Cluster Storm. Cluster Storm is an ability that you activate, and when you click it, it will cover you in lightning. You click it again, it'll shoot a lightning bolt in front of you. And you can activate it multiple times, right? So when you start out, those are the two abilities you have. It's pretty straightforward.
You don't have to point it. It's just
No, it's not. It's not. There it is.
There we go.
You got to point it, man.
You don't have to point it at the TV. Concentrate.
It worked. I concentrated harder and it worked. Anyway, so you guys have seen a tooltip before, right? It's got icons, description, names, and our things have a special little thing, keywords. So keywords, that's the system that we're going to use to support multi-classing, right? Keywords are the system that allows abilities to talk to each other, which, as you'll see, is super duper important. So let's go back to our example. You start out with Lightning Strike and Cluster Storm, and as you're playing, you're killing some monsters, you're doing some stuff, and you get enough advancement to unlock two new abilities, and you unlock Spark Rush and Energize. Spark Rush is the ability you saw that turns you into lightning, and it allows you to dash in different directions, right? It's actually, it's super fun to use, but regardless, it's a nature and lightning ability. Energize is a passive ability, and if you remember back to last year, we talked about passive abilities being abilities that you can equip that, well, they're passive. You don't have to activate them, and they do what they do, right? So Energize says whenever you use a lightning ability, the next lightning ability you use will restore energy, right? Energy is what you use to cast abilities. So if you look over there, Spark Rush is nature lightning, so it would work with Spark Rush, it would work with Lightning Strike, and it would work with whatever the other ability was. Yeah. Cluster Storm, right? It totally works with that one.
Cyclone, it would work with Cyclone.
Cyclone, yeah. So when you use these abilities in a row, you're able to gain a lot of energy, right? And that allows you to attack very quickly, but you'll end up then using a bunch of energy. So that's kind of how the Tempest will go through, or that's, I guess, our first example of how keywords work. Keywords are divided up into two main categories. I love categorizing things, as Darren well knows. The first category is origin. We'll discuss that in a moment. And then the next one is damage type. The origin keywords, they're kind of the power source for the class, right? It's where you derive your energy from. So if I was a cleric, or we'll go with the Tempest maybe, I said the Tempest was a kind of like a druid assassin. What do you think the druid or a Tempest would get their power source from? Nature. Have you guys seen this already? Oh, all right.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
It just works. It's weird. Nature, right, yeah. And the origin keywords actually define the visual flavor of an ability, right? So all nature abilities will have, well, not all of them, but most of them will have the same, the same visual flavor. They'll use similar color particle effects. They'll have, some structure to them that you can look at it and you can be like, hey, that's a nature ability, or hey, that's a divine
language,
ability.
if you will.
Yeah, visual language.
Iconic familiarity.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Wow,
Thank you.
buzzwords all mashed together.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So this is not the example. So martial is the first keyword or origin keyword that I want to talk about. Martial is represented by people with lots of discipline. They're weapon users. They're non-magical, right? And when I was talking about visual flavor, this is the sort of thing that I was talking about. If you look at these weapons, these are martial weapons. They're ruggedly constructed. They have big, thick spikes on them, and they look like they smash face, right? Like they're martial.
They're not elegant.
Are those dwarven
They're
weapons?
not elegant. Yes, those are dwarven weapons.
Dwarven weapons.
Yeah, there you go. So that's an example of martial. The next one is nature. So we've already talked about nature. Nature, plants, outdoor weather, druids, right? So they would have the nature origin. And the next one's divine. We talked about a divine class today. We talked about the cleric. Divine is not just holy, but it's also unholy. So there are two sides, good and evil. And here's an example, or two examples rather, of divine weapons. So the one on the left you guys saw earlier, the cleric was actually wielding this shield, though he was not wielding this sword. And then the one on the right is kind of the unholy side of divine. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on all of these, but there are 6 origins, and they are, the remaining ones are psionic, elemental, and arcane. And each of the classes will identify with one, possibly 2 of these. And it's not just classes, actually. It's also items and abilities and stuff like that. So we'll use them all over the place. The next category is damage keywords. Damage keywords are sort of the expression of power, right? So if I have a fire spell, it will express its power from its origin as fire. And then the next one, it identifies the mechanical category. And what I mean by that is these abilities will share mechanics when they share a damage type. Not always, but it's kind of the first go-to thing we do. And that might be unclear, but I'll go through a couple examples. So lightning. Lightning, you guys saw a bunch of lightning abilities today. A key thing that lightning abilities do is energy fluctuation. So as you guys saw with Energize, they'll gain a lot of energy, or lightning spells will gain a lot of energy and then use a lot of energy. And they also involve a lot of movement. So the Tempest really typifies the lightning damage type. The example ability that I gave here was static charge. So when you move, you restore energy. So it's all about movement, right? But then your abilities cost more and they deal more damage. So it's about energy fluctuation as well. The next type is physical. Physical is very similar to martial. It's weapon attacks, it's bleeding, it's a lot of armor mechanics. It's very physical, kind of with your body, putting your body in front of things and being acrobatic and stuff like that. The example I give here is Bulwark, and Bulwark is a great example for physical abilities. You get in front of somebody, you throw your shield out, and you take the damage instead of the people behind you. That's putting your body to good work, right? And then Shadow. Shadow is the next type. You guys probably already know what Shadow stuff does, right? It's deception, it's strains, and trade-offs. Dark Mantle says, hey, I get bonus damage, and I gain armor over time, but I also have to trade off health for those bonuses. And these are just example abilities, but they sort of get you guys on the same page that we're thinking. And these are the remaining damage types. We have Fire, Affliction, Radiance, and Water. Why don't you check those out? So, this is my favorite slide.
Coolest slide ever.
Yeah.
It'll look at least that good in the game.
Yeah. In-game assets, right?
Don't make promises that we can't keep.
I swear it will look at least that good.
So when we go to make an item, ability, or a class, we take an origin and a damage type or two, and we combine them together to get the end result. And I'll show you what we're talking about. Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. We actually do this. I know, I'm a failure. But we have we combine them together in a lot of interesting ways to get a lot of different products, right? So it gives us really a lot of variation when we're talking about multi-classing. Here are my examples. So this is a nature physical sword, and you can see, you can kind of get that feeling, right? Because it's got a lot of spikes or teeth or whatever they could be, and it looks like it's brutal and like it's going to destroy something. This is an example of an Arcane Shadow weapon set. It's pretty cool. And this is a Divine Fire weapon set. So the cleric would actually probably love to wield something like this. We'll show you why in a minute. And this is Divine Shadow. So it's not just items, like we said, it's also classes. So the cleric is a Divine Fire and a Divine Radiance class. So that means all of his abilities will have the divine flavor, but his ability mechanics will fit fairly strongly in fire and radiance mechanics. And if you remember back to it, fire, if you read the slides, fire is explosive and very, very impressive looking, and radiance is kind of more about helping other people. And we'll back to our Tempest example here. The Tempest is nature lightning and nature physical. So it's not just abilities and all of that sort of stuff. It's tied into our items, and our items are an integral part of your build. We sort of touched on it last year, but we can't stress it enough. You're going to want good items, and the items that you get really change the way you play. So say we go back to our Tempest example, and she's running through, and she kills something, and she gets this awesome item called the Phosphorescent Amulet. And what it does is it says whenever a nature ability, which is an origin, restores your energy, you gain that much armor. Wow, that's really cool, because I have Lightning Strike, and then I have Energize, so I'm using Lightning Strike all the time, or Spark Rush, or something like that, and I'm gaining energy. Well, it's also, Energize also happens to be a nature ability. So now I'm gaining energy when I use all of my abilities, and when I do that, I gain armor, right? So now I can go out and I can be more defensive. I can get in people's faces more often, and I'm not as worried about dying as I might be, or as dodging it as much as I might be. So far, what we've talked about the first 4 abilities that you get, and we talked about how items affect it. Well, there are actually lots of different ways that you can advance in EverQuest Next. And one of my favorite ways, or one of the new ways that we have, is achievements in lore. So when you're out in the world, say you're hanging out with the dwarves and you're blacksmithing with them, you make a bunch of breastplates, and you're just generally hanging out and killing some foes and stuff. And over time, maybe you drink 500 kegs of dwarven ale, right? Like, it happens. These things, yeah, they happen, right? And so the dwarves think you're super cool for this, right? They're like, wow, what a tolerance, that's amazing. And so they're like, we're going to teach you Dwarven Tenacity. And Dwarven Tenacity says, based on my armor percentage, I get bonus damage, right? So now you can kind of start to see all of these things come together. You can say, hey, cool, I've got my abilities, I have passive abilities, I've got this item, Phosphorescent Amulet, that allows me to gain armor, and I get energy from Energize, and then I've got Dwarven Tenacity, which builds on that and says, hey, cool, energy, armor, and damage. Hey, this sounds like a pretty cool package, right? And that's something that maybe you just found while you're out in the world exploring, and you're doing, kind of the stuff you like to do. This is just a small example of what we're talking about. I actually took that example and I extended it further, right? So this is, these are an example of 10 abilities. I'm not going to go into them much, but you can see their origins and their damage types, so you kind of get an idea of the flavor of what they'll do. You see Phosphorescent Amulet there, and then we have 3 other items. Brutal Blade. Brutal Blade says whenever I score a critical strike with a physical attack, it lowers the cooldowns of my physical abilities. Then I have Crystalline Band that allows my physical abilities to crit more often. But the really crazy item that I got, which is extra cool, is the Survivalist Tunic. And it says all of my nature abilities are also considered physical. So if you think about that, you can kind of start to see how all this stuff really just interacts, right? Like they all just sort of build off of each other. And these, we plan on making quite a few of these so that you guys can go out and explore and find all of the situations and all of the stuff that, how do you like to play? I like to do this. Well, there are some items for that. There's some passive abilities for that. There are achievements that you can do. And the way you play your character is kind of determined based on your experiences and what you've done as a player.
So before Michael continues, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was item discovery. And sometimes when you find an item in an MMO, you're very excited, and more often than not, because most MMOs put you down a very narrow path, you say, oh, well, I can't use that. Maybe I can use it on an alt. Maybe I can sell it. Here we want you to see, oh, that's a shadow item. It increases my damage when I use shadow abilities. I better go get a necromancer. Mm-hmm. I better go get this other class so that I can merge the class that I have with that class. And suddenly item discovery becomes something that is much more fun and exciting every time you see an item.
So really all we've talked about thus far in this panel is the Tempest, and I thought it was on multi-classing, right? Oops. But let's bring up the other classes that we had mentioned in the keynote. So this is the Cleric, the Wizard, the Warrior, and the Elementalist. And now that you guys know a little bit more information about origins and damage types, you can pick out good information just from this slide, right? You can say, hey, cool. Actually, this is a better slide. You can look at this slide and you can say, hey, cool. I understand how these things work, and now I can know what works together. I can look at the Tempest and say, hey, I've got all these cool physical abilities. The Warrior also has some cool physical abilities that I might be able to borrow. And if you think way back to like 10 minutes ago, yeah, I know. You can remember about the primary and secondary abilities, right? My secondary abilities are abilities that I can use from other classes. So when I look at this, I say, cool, I'm going to take some of those physical abilities, and I'm going to put them on my Tempest. And now I have a little more rugged version of a Tempest. Or I can take some, let's see, if I'm the Wizard, I can look and I've got a bunch of options for fire. So I can take fire abilities and use those. So now you're kind of beginning to see what we're talking about when we talk about multi-classing. And so those are just the options we've talked about right now. And these are some of the options that you guys will have in the future. So if we've talked about releasing 40 classes, this is just 20. And if you look at and you see all these different symbols that work together, you can kind of get an idea as far as where we're going when we talk about multi-classing. The things that share symbols will be usable together, and you'll be able to borrow from them and use all those options. This slide doesn't really even show all the items and the passive abilities that you guys have at your disposal to build the class that you want, to go out there and
These may or may not represent classes that we're going to have. So you can take a screenshot of this and try to puzzle out what they could be.
Yeah, remember. So yeah, no, that could have happened. This was a lot of fun to put this slide together and kind of see where we're going with stuff. But we're pretty confident that with all of these abilities and all of the with the keyword system being the foundation for our multi-classing system, that you guys will be able to do what you want and have the play styles that you enjoy. Anything to add, Jeff?
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's pretty much the keyword system and multi-classing. So. Does anybody have any questions?
No, we're done, I think.
We're good?
Right? No one's
Just
done?
none?
No, just one person.
Just one, all right.
Just
You
one
explained
question?
it so well.
Come on.
Did I?
Yeah.
Woo! Just
Come on,
one,
if you
all
have
right.
questions, go ahead and line up over here on the side. And
You can
we'll
make
bring
it a
you up.
long question.
Come on, guys.
Maybe a long question,
You
yeah.
have stunned them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, do the classes or abilities, the damage types or the origins, is their effectiveness heightened or decreased based on what they're up against? The other damage types or origins? So like fire versus water.
So we can talk about the, so we didn't want to go with the traditional resistance system, which makes you ineffective when you go up against certain creatures, but we do want to have a damage bonus system. So if you were using fire, for example, against a fire person, it would do normal damage, right? Because we don't want necessarily your class choices to be a bad thing, but we do want you to have bonuses versus ice creatures. So they can always be a good thing without being a bad thing. So that's our plan.
And I think I could take your question in one of two ways. So one could interpret how would we handle resistances, but there's also the question of, do any of the types have affinity or opposition toward one another, wherein you might never find a class that is both one and an other because in somehow they oppose one another. Not necessarily something that we planned out. So over time, you might find things that do not appear to be or do not appear to have an affinity with one another in one particular character class. Also, you wouldn't necessarily have an opposition to a particular item depending on what core class you had.
Next.
Hello. In the keynote, you guys talked about how certain classes are going to be more, damage-oriented, like the wizard, versus certain classes that are going to be more supportive, like the cleric was. And so I guess I was wondering, normally you would expect more of the supporting classes to be like wizard, or to be like mage and priest types if you're using the 4 original archetypes. But do you guys also have plans to do like supporting sort of warrior types and supporting sort of rogue types?
So, yeah, so the answer is yes, right? So we're going to be creating many different play styles. Some of them may be more or less directed towards kind of the play style that you're talking about. But that's kind of where the multi-classing system can come in and be handy, right? You can say, hey, I'm going to take my warrior and I want him to be more offensive oriented, and so I'm going to take abilities from another physical class and that deal more damage or something like that.
You may have seen that in the panel portion that we were walking through, that the wizard, for example, had radiance as one of his things, and radiance has a lot of support. Could you make a support wizard as opposed to a damage wizard? Absolutely. So we want lots of flexibility within each class to do those things, and we will certainly be blurring the lines and have, I'm not announcing a class here, but having something like a tank mage or something like that, which would be super fun to play.
Thank you.
We might design that class, or you might design it yourself.
Right,
That's
given
really,
the tools that you have.
yeah, that's the beauty of the
those
multi-classing system, is that even if we don't make that class that you want, it's what they were just saying.
Right.
is,
If we
if we
do
don't
not
put something that's
if we do
perfect.
not author a play style that fits your interests at the launch of the game, or we do not author one that fits your interests 3 months in, hopefully we'll give you the tools to pursue that goal on your own with the multiple classes and weapons and combinations of abilities that we do launch with.
Two things. How will, say, divine fire be different from arcane fire or martial fire? Or will they even have any difference?
So
Mechanically or and optically?
So they will definitely have a difference, and so the origin doesn't just necessarily change the particles, though it will have an effect. It would also mechanically change things, and so there are things. As an example, there was a slide that showed some of the cleric abilities, and we've talked about making an ability called Purifying Fire, and that would be a divine fire ability. And what it does is it's more support oriented, right? You put a big beacon of kind of holy flames, and it will remove debuffs from people. So that would be an example of how fire might work for a cleric, but fire for somebody like Elementalist will create a beacon of fire that you don't want to stand in.
Or beacon of fire, golden fire that damages your enemies, but
Sure.
removes debuffs on your allies. By the visual language of color and types of particles and mechanics, things will be defined.
Okay. And in extension to that, you showed the tunic that turns or adds physical to the nature abilities, will that also have an effect on you know, their effectiveness? Say I have a tunic that makes my lightning abilities also fire abilities. Will they now be better against ice elementals, or because they're now fire also, or not?
Yeah, so going back to the system that Darren kind of started talking about, it would, yeah. So whenever you obtain a keyword in another game, it would be like adding that damage type. And so it adds all of the properties and benefits and sometimes negatives that pertain to it. So.
Great. And we'd love to, in the future, have that affect the particle dynamically. That'll be tough, but...
So I kind of have two unrelated questions. The first one, the holy, unholy part, would those be a deity type choice for cleric? Would that be like two different classes?
That's a good question. I know that one of the things we do not plan on is enforcing you to choose a deity when you start the game, because we feel that's a poor choice. You don't know anything about the game, so why would you shoehorn yourself? I remember making a wizard and not choosing Soul Row, and getting to level 10 and then going back and going, I can't wear the rings, or whatever the thing was. This is a long time ago. And now I got to remake my guy so that I can itemize properly because I'm a min-maxer. So that was not a fun choice. But we do want you to be able to interact with the gods in whatever lore we support. But I don't think that will be, certainly not initially, a direct tie to those people.
And if I might add a little bit to that, it's more along the lines, if you wanted to be unholy and say fire, you would pick a class that has that as the type. So that might not be the cleric. It might be something else that we won't name right now that everybody can probably think about that might actually use those kind of damage and origins.
It's not to say that we might not put you through a process of character evolution to reach the point where you could obtain a character class that had unholy. And you might need to do things that were related to the gods to achieve that particular status. But I don't think that we would ever couple the choice of which god to worship that would unlock classes.
Dave gave an example this morning in the keynote where you do service for a priest of, I don't know, Brel or something he said. That gets you the cleric class. So that definitely, content, as Michael talked about, is going to get you abilities and it's going to get you classes.
The other question was, there were quite a few question marks on that slide. Are you guys planning on doing other ones that we haven't talked about, or is that kind of...
other damage types?
Yeah.
So, yes. It's...
That's not what the question marks were for, by the way.
The question, can we hit back on this? Is that...
No, I would.
Back never works?
Yeah, okay. Don't ever hit back on this thing.
Why is there a back button on there?
There's a back button on it, so we could just...
Well, it's to tempt you. It's the history erasure button.
Yeah. So the question marks were actually, they didn't represent things that didn't exist. They represented things that we didn't share.
What to show you.
Yeah, we were
Consider them
keeping some
possibilities.
things back.
Yes.
And the other part, of course, is we only showed, there were only 20 possibles up there, and as we've announced many times, we're going to launch with at least 40 different classes. So we only even showed you part of half of the classes that we've been talking about.
So something that I kind of want to touch on in response to that question was that we've talked about it before, but we don't necessarily want to make, and this is in regards to kind of branching classes and stuff like that, we don't necessarily want to make one class super complicated to understand or super complicated to get the pieces for. We want to make having multiple options and being able to combine those options the interesting part, right? So if I go up and I get all my cleric stuff, like you can get all your cleric stuff, and the cleric will play well, and he'll have an interesting play style and all that sort of stuff. And it may not be having a choice between a bunch of different gods or something like that. It might be finding a different class that is tied to a different god, or taking stuff from an elementalist and adding it or something like that.
Something
right?
I think that we may be taking for granted in this discussion is that everybody here knows about the fact that you can collect and be multiple classes on the same character.
Sure.
So this might not make sense to a lot of people, but the plan is that you can make a single character and collect all of the classes. Some of those classes will have requirements. Some of those class requirements might be the requirement of getting other classes. But you can be all of those. You cannot be them all at once. You have to choose a primary class, and then it'll let you build a class.
You can't own them all at once.
You can't
though,
own
so.
them all at once, and you'll have a big roster, a catalog of all the things you own and all the things you could own in the future.
It'll take you a career to gather all those things together, but you don't have to switch to alts to play different types of characters if that's what you want to do.
And I believe that's I was just told that's a perfect segue into the next question.
Oh,
All right.
that's fantastic.
We planned it that way.
So last year you mentioned that there wouldn't be leveling in Next.
That is true.
And you just mentioned ability points. I was wondering, okay, so say you're like a warrior. Can you spend your ability points in any
Yes.
of your, okay.
Yeah, we actually announced that last year that you can do whatever you want in the game, and I'm sorry for speaking for you guys, but you can do whatever you want in the game and collect those advancement points or whatever they're going to end up being called, and you can spend them in whatever you want, not necessarily the thing you're doing. So even if you've maxed out a class, you can still play that, get advancement points, and then apply it to something else.
It's really all about freedom, right? I need to raid with Terry tonight, so I need to play one of my higher power characters. One of my higher power classes, and I've got 10 other classes that I'm still advancing. Well, I'm earning points, I'm earning advancement, right? We're not going to go into details of what that system actually is, and then you spend that advancement on any class you want.
So then on the lower levels, you'll be more item based before you get more of those abilities?
So there are no low levels, right? It's sort of when you start out, right?
I'm speaking in terms of,
Low progression, right? You've got 2 abilities when you start.
Yeah.
We saw that with the Tempest. You will be functional. Remember, we have the world has tiers. We talked about tiers and tiers of depth, and the world will have tiers, and the tier 1 NPCs will be what you fight, what you do. The content will be appropriate to you, and then you move into harder, more difficult things.
Is there any worries with the emergent AI that they might become too difficult?
Oh, that's certainly a possibility, but we have the ability. I mean, there's a possibility that everything will be broken, right? So
That's the beauty of anything that's emergent.
We're hoping
We're
it
not
works out,
sure.
Well, you actually bring up.
We have this cool tuning knob on the NPCs where we can tune their AI, make them more stupid. So they stop making good choices and they stop making really bad choices. And then all we have to do, so let's say that you had hit the maximum of the content that we had, and we needed to give you more content. We could simply ratchet up their AI without changing hit points, without changing damage. They just start making better choices, and it's hard. They can easily outstrip you if we max that out.
Thank you. The line has grown.
Does Colette have a question?
Colette, you have a question?
What's your question,
I
Colette?
think she cut.
I did cut.
One
Twitter
second.
cut. Twitter cut in line. This is a question we got on Twitter. Will NPCs and monsters also use the same multi-class system? The things you come across in the world?
And hold on before you answer this question, because for those of you that don't know, this is Colette Murphy, also known as Dexella. She's been helping us out today, so.
Thank you, Colette.
Now you guys can answer the question. Go ahead.
So I'm going to channel Terry. Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
No, that's channeling
sorry.
anti-Terry.
No. Yeah, they will be. The answer is yes.
So you please go. I don't
Yelling at each other. The answer is yes, right? The idea is that we kind of work this system into just the whole game, right? Like we should be able to see it in items, abilities, NPCs. When you go into an area, you can say, hey, this kind of feels divine, right? And hopefully that just kind of permeates all of the systems and allows us to really kind of just identify things.
Who can guess why we want to do it that way? Why do we want it to be intuitive? Because we want you to be able to make content.
Yes.
So if you don't understand how to play it, how could you possibly understand how to create it?
It's true.
It has to be intuitive. It has to be one way, that way straightforward, able to be assimilated, simple to learn, challenging to master, all the things that we've talked about.
I think that deserves a clap. What do you think?
Hey, so 40 classes is obviously a lot of classes for any game, especially on release. alone, you know. My question is, how are you going to make it so that each class actually feels different and not just a different flavor of some core mechanic?
It's a great question. Michael, what's the answer?
Let's defer to the lead systems designer.
And you can't answer this one with just a yes or no.
I've got a thing to do right now. The reason we're doing the keyword system and a lot of the other systems is so that we have a lot of different things to latch onto and emphasize in a class, right? So we go and we look at all the, the origins and the damage types and the different heroic movement types that we haven't really gotten into. And you can say, hey, you guys saw the Tempest, and the Tempest is really good at dashing. The Tempest is nature, the Tempest is lightning, all of those things. Well, there are, Terry could probably do the math off the top of his head, but there are many.
42.
Yeah, well, yeah, all right. But there are many different combinations that are there. And you'd be surprised how differently just changing one of those knobs, not that that's what we're going to do, would actually change the way you play. Imagine making, you have a warrior that likes to move around and to leap places. Well, there are many builds centered around just leaping, right? Oh, I leap somewhere and then I get, a bunch of bonus armor, or I leap somewhere and I get a bunch of bonus damage, right? And that's an oversimplification of it, but this guy built his warrior on leaping, this guy built his warrior around his physical abilities, this guy built his warrior around martial stuff, or this guy built his warrior and got an item that made all of his martial stuff nature. Oh, okay, well that means he's got all of this energy consumption stuff and all of these, regenerative things and stuff like that. Well, that guy's going to play way different than this guy is going to play. And so hopefully with all the variations, well, not hopefully, I mean, we can kind of see how it will unfold. There will be a lot of variations that go along.
And remember, we announced last year, so you may not remember, these classes are not your typical MMO classes. They're much smaller as far as ability size goes. We're targeting roughly 12 per class. So there'll be tight, focused gameplay for each one of them. And that's how we would do it. If we made generalists across the board, it would be very difficult for us to make distinct feels for a class.
Yeah, they're not going to be the classes that have 50 abilities.
They're not a bard, right?
Absolutely.
I love bards. I played a bard, but that guy could do everything.
Yeah, and for a lot of reasons, they won't have as many abilities, right? Like we don't. That's a lot of abilities to kind of manage and to use at one time, and so we narrowed down the abilities there, and also so that we can focus in on what really makes the class tick. What is the coolness,
Which is the interesting choices combining items and classes and abilities and all that stuff.
So that's a huge question, but it's a great one because it's something that everybody needs to understand about how the classes are focused and they're distilled down to just those core elements, and that's how we won't have 7 versions of a wizard, because they're going to be different in the way they play, and they're going to be honed to perfection, or as close as Darren and Michael and Jeff can get them.
Super close.
Thank you.
Be careful.
It's terrifying.
You mentioned in the last keynote that Wizard and Warrior were two of the starting classes. I don't expect you to tell us what all of them are, but how many will we have to choose from at the beginning?
We have made a couple of statements about starting.
Yeah, we have actually. We've actually said that number last year. We did. We think it's going to be. That's okay. But that's why we're here to talk about it today. We've talked about that. There's going to be around 8.
Yes.
Initial ones, but you're not going to get all of those 8 to start with.
Well, those were 8 starting choices that you could make.
Yeah.
And then at the inception of the game, you are choosing one of these 8. But then you can immediately go and collect other classes and collect the ones you didn't choose. So you choose a warrior to begin with. You immediately can go and get the wizard doing content.
Yeah, and that's also going along with that. That's a great thing that we had talked about before, but didn't come up when they were talking in the panel, is that we're going to introduce you to these classes because people have talked about how crazy it is with 40 classes and everything like that. The idea is that you're going to ramp up and you're going to learn about these classes as you collect them. Yeah. And so you're not going to be like, oh, here's 40 classes, now figure out how you're going to play the game. We wouldn't do that to you.
Yeah, you opt into them and do content around them, and so as Dave mentioned in the keynote, you will do something and then they'll be like, hey, that was all about the Tempest, and you're like, what? That's crazy. I already know about the Tempest, and so that's kind of how a lot of them will be introduced.
Thank you. And we have about 11 minutes left to questions.
Well, I'll go fast.
All right, I'm seeing that a lot of the items that you're adding that a character can pick up can add to their abilities. What I'm wondering if certain classes are going to be limited to certain styles of armor or that, or if, like for instance, are we going to have a plate-wearing wizard?
Well, yeah, so I'd mentioned that earlier. So let's take the word wizard out of there and just say spellcaster. Will you have a plate-wearing spellcaster? Definitely in the cards to do that. There's no reason not to.
Yes, so when you choose your primary class chooses or determines the type of armor you can wear.
Right.
So a wizard specifically would not be able to wear plate, but that doesn't mean there's not a caster class out there that could.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Or that uses swords, or that uses two-handed, whatever it is. Right.
Highly desirable.
Oh, we know this guy.
I'm sorry, but we're not going to answer any questions from Locke.
We're done now, right?
Hey guys. It looks like you've put a lot of effort into making the system very intuitive and to have a lot of depth at the same time. But you know, we know players have a habit of going for cookie cutter and flavor of the month bills. I was wondering how you as designers. Oh, it's okay, go for it. I was wondering how you as designers felt about that and how you'd approach either supporting that or discouraging it.
Well, I think one of the important things to remember with a system like the one that we're engineering here, as the game evolves, every time an item or every time a new character class or new ability is created in the game, the strategic landscape of the game itself evolves. It may certainly be true that at certain points in time there is a cookie cutter build. I may look at Darren and say, hey, you know, I'm playing the Arcane Mage, and honestly, with the gear that's available to me today, there's really only one effective build. I am a min-maxer. I know what the most effective Arcane Mage build is. Let's just acknowledge it, right? I have the gear. I am that Arcane Mage. It's how I choose to play. But as soon as, let's say, potentially a single item enters the game, the strategic landscape that led me to that body of decisions has changed. As soon as a monster comes into the game that I wish to kill, that has a unique element of gameplay or abilities, or a new type of heroic movement is added to the world, it could literally, I mean, it just completely upset the apple cart, right? So I imagine that emergent behaviors, combinations of abilities, new ideas, and ways of combining abilities will be discovered as time progresses. It's highly desirable, right? We want the game to feel like a living, breathing thing.
Yeah. So, and to add on to what Jeff just said, we at this table are min-maxers. That's what we do. The system designers do that, right? I love finding the right items and making just a superb character. And as Jeff said, that will change over time. But there isn't a reason that a particular class couldn't have 4 or 5 really good builds. And yeah, that will change over time. And we don't discourage that. It's great. And as we find abilities that don't have the support, or classes, if that were to happen, to have the support either through itemization or through multi-classing, then we'll seek to right that balance. So we've done class design before, and it is an ongoing battle.
The worst possible case scenario would be, let's say, the rogue, a starting character class, who we have offered assurances on multiple occasions will be entirely playable with his own set of abilities and no one else's, his own set of gear and armor and no one else's, through no combination or access of the system that we talked about here. Viable and enjoyable to play all the way into the 5th tier or beyond. Could be a situation that would be an imbalance where that would not be the case. If that was not enjoyable, if items and gear and opportunity in the world did not offer that opportunity, then that would be the worst possible imbalance, right? Where we had a character that we were trying to represent as playable and fun, and at some point in time it would fall off the wagon, and that would mobilize us.
The classes we played today that we saw in the videos, those were all their own abilities. No multi-classing was involved, and they're really fun to play. And that is our goal. That is the core of our goal, is that is super fun. And then you take 2 super fun things, and it becomes super, super fun. That's the rough plan anyway.
I believe that is the equation that Terry could verify. That's the equation.
Is fun plus fun super, super fun?
No, it's super fun.
Oh, good eye. Sorry.
Man.
Not a math.
Or is it super, super fun?
How do
we'll figure it out.
Okay, I have about 500 follow-up questions.
Okay,
well,
awesome.
Come find us later and we'll answer them all. I still owe you a hat. Yes, it's true. I have said it now on Twitch. It's the second time because I did it on your Twitch stream. I owe you a hat. I have it. I will get it to you today.
So I noticed that you do unlock skills through ability points, and you do progress that way. Also, my question is there a way to, let's say, strengthen those skills by, let's say, an EQ2 system where you do some collection through the world from books or some crafted items that can actually increase the skills besides just the actual itemization in the game?
So it's a system that we're still discussing, but it's definitely something we're interested in. It's something that I think is worthwhile. We can't really discuss details on it right now, so I apologize, but I think it's super cool.
We have talked about it.
That's a great idea.
It's a great idea, yes.
And to be honest, it's been in our plans in some form or fashion. We just, working it into the rest of the system and making it make sense, because we want that first ability that you get to still be awesome, 6 months later or a year later, right? Because you don't level out of those things. There's not a leveling. So.
Okay, and I'm going to ask, we have just about 5 minutes left for questions before we're done. We're going to try to shorten the answers a little bit so that we can get as many questions in as possible.
I'll shut up then.
Jeff just can't talk.
So Jeff, can you turn off Jeff's? No, I'm kidding.
I just want a quick clarification point. You guys said that you're going to have about 8 starting classes. I was wondering, is there going to be any differentiation based on which race you choose? Are ogres going to have more like fighter types versus elves having more roguish or mage types?
As we said last year, everyone can be everything.
To start out with.
To start
initial choices for the races.
we haven't planned all that stuff.
Yeah, we haven't defined that yet, but that's a great question to talk about, and we'll take it back.
Yeah,
and
you can
we'll
eventually gather everything, but yeah.
Yeah, just those initial
Quick
ones.
question.
That was a good one.
Quick answers.
I know you.
We would love to talk a lot. So.
Quick two-part question. Will any of these multi-classes be mutually exclusive? Can I be holy and unholy? And in the coming year, coming up to the next SOE Live, can we expect classes to be released before then, or are we going to get 3 more at the next SOE Live?
So,
What do you want, 4?
A nice first hard question.
No, I'm going to answer the last part first, and then we'll go with that, and I'll take care of this. So we've told you that you guys can expect to hear a lot more about EverQuest Next in particular over the next year, and so part of that will be things like, what are the other races? What are some of the other classes? Don't worry, you won't have to wait a year to find out about 3 more of them. And then let's go with the first question.
What was the first question again?
So I can
holy
answer
and unholy at the same time.
I'm so scared by the second question.
It may not be good.
So obtaining the character classes is what might be exclusive to the point where you have to, let's say, have a certain faction with an entity before he will grant you a class, and that may be opposed to another class and force you to travel both paths over the course of your career. And when I describe that, I'm talking about classes that are more or less or would be at the pinnacle of advancement, that would require, let's say, multiple achievements or certain situations. Because there will be factions in EQ Next. Raising your faction with one particular entity will lower it with others, theoretically. And if there's a gateway to character classes through either one of those, you could be stymied.
It's a pretty complicated problem that we have to solve.
The non-Jeff answer is that it's definitely possible.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. All right.
Sorry, Jeff.
Yeah, my question is, you focused a lot about the different abilities you can find and unlock and use them in other characters. Is there, by defining, let's say, the cleric, because he's up there, is there going to be those abilities that the cleric unlocks by doing deeds and going, let's say, further with his divine god or what have you, that are absolutely unique to the cleric, that when he does that, you know that, okay, that guy's playing a cleric class because you can't use that ability in combination with another?
Yes.
There is?
Yes.
Excellent.
That was a great short answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
So a lot of my questions have been answered already, but I had a question about obtaining classes. So, so basically, my question was, because of the emergent AI, I was curious, can these quests, like NPCs you have to meet to get these classes, are they going to move around? Are there going to be multiple NPCs that will allow you to get these classes, or are there going to be certain ones that you have to find, and then will they always be there, or are they going to...
So Dave covered that a little bit this morning, I believe, when he spoke about Rosong.
Darren, it was the perfect opportunity. You could just have said yes, yes, no. Because you asked 3 questions, and those are the answers.
Rosong, the notion of a static quest giver is not something that we embrace. So Rosong will be a guide to you. It'll put you in situations where you can do content, not necessarily pointed to that guy, because we want our NPCs to be moving around. We don't want static quest givers.
Okay, good. Cool. That's cool. Thank you. Awesome. Hold on one second. No, it doesn't have to be the last one. I think we're gonna wrap up the live stream at this point, but we're gonna answer the rest of the questions. So this is what you get for not actually showing up at SOE Live. You don't get to hear the end. But thank you for joining us on Twitch, and we look forward to the rest of the streams that we're gonna have and Landmark Live and everything.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for showing up, guys.
Thank you.
Stay in the room. We'll answer some more questions.